Regrets are the absolute worst and they can literally eat your life. I still think about the time when I had the opportunity to go to a lot of opera classes back when I was in high school and I didn't. And I think about the times when I didn't socialize enough in first year university because I told myself that all I should be doing is studying. So regrets are the worst. And this is why in today's video, I want to talk about the regret minimization framework. This is an unspoken rule that I've actually been using for a really long time, and only recently I found out that there is actually a term called the regret minimization framework. I've been using regret minimization framework for a long time as an unspoken rule. However, I did not know that it had an actual scientific or made up name, which is regret minimization framework. And it's a tool that I think is incredibly useful and I'd love to tell you guys more about in this video. It's funny because the way I found out about this framework is again listening to Alex Lieberman's Founder's Journal, which I talked about in the last episode. He talked about this specific framework in one of his podcast episodes. And, you know, I should really be sponsored by the podcast at this point, but I'm not. This is just, I just really love it. Regrets are really terrible, and regret minimization framework is incredibly simple, which is why I love it. The way it goes is whenever you make any type of decision, whether career or personal decision, you can ask yourself, 20 years from now, if I don't do this, would I regret it? Super simple, incredibly simple. And this is why it's so powerful, because as Alex puts it in his podcast, it makes you focus on the long term. And the way Alex explains regret minimization framework is actually through the prism of Jeff Bezos's, the founder of Amazon's career. You see, as it turns out, Jeff actually had an incredibly successful career before Amazon. First of all, Jeff went to Princeton, top of the top university here in the States. And after he graduated Princeton, he actually joined a fintech startup as an engineer. And very quickly, he rose through the ranks in the startup and became a head of development. Then he got bored and he decided to move to another fintech company. Afterwards, he again gets bored, finds a new learning opportunity and joins a hedge fund. By the time he decides to leave the hedge fund, he had $50 billion under the management, and literally his role at this company was to research new trends. And one of the trends he saw was book sales. And imagine, he is so accomplished, very high up at a hedge fund. I mean, people at a hedge fund make a lot of money. And he decides to start a startup at the time when, imagine, the internet was so early. So he decides to do that. And the reason why he did that was exactly because of the regret minimization framework. So he asked himself, okay, 20 years from now, would I regret not starting this business? And he decided to leave and start Amazon. And, you know, the rest is history. I really, really love it because I'm just looking back at my own life and I'm realizing that I have been using this framework for quite some time, especially with the very big decisions in my life without really knowing it and realizing it. For example, when I decided to transition from chemical engineering to take a leap to learn how to code and get an internship as a software engineer, when I did realize that, hey, chem eng is not my cup of tea, I really knew that I needed to take the risk of doing something else. And I asked myself, hey, would I regret not taking this leap of faith to try to learn how to code and get a job as a software engineer later? And the answer was yes, I would. So I decided to gamble all my chemical engineering career and do that. And it definitely paid off. What I love about the simple question about what would your future self think 20 years from now is that it forces us to think long-term versus focusing on our short-term emotional decisions, because short-term, all our brain really wants is to feel safe. But if we're feeling safe all the time, that kind of diminishes and slows down the progress and the growth that we could be making. So I think putting yourself into your shoes of your future self is incredibly powerful because of that. Another example was when I decided to move to the States after graduating from Waterloo. So I had a very, very easy path to stay in Canada, because when you study in Canada as an international student, it's very easy to get a 3-year work permit. And so, when you get that 3-year work permit, you know that you'll probably get a job first, and then your job will sponsor your permanent residency. And all of that is pretty straightforward, especially if you have a Canadian degree. But by that time, I've already spent almost a year combined in the US. And I knew that, hey, I was already in tech at that time, and I knew that I just wanted to be in San Francisco. San Francisco was where it was at. And yeah, I could have stayed in Toronto. Toronto has a good startup scene, but I just knew that I had to be in the States. And even though it was very unconventional for me to go and figure out my state's immigration situation, I had to jump through quite a few loops to get that figured out. I decided to take that leap of faith, because 20 years from that time, I would probably have regretted not to have taken it. When was the last time you asked yourself this question? Is this a framework that you live by? Or is this something new? Really curious to hear your thoughts. Please consider sharing them in the comment section down below. And I absolutely always read comments. Most of the times I respond to almost all of them. I know we got a ton of incredible comments in my last video about why you should not follow your passion, that you should check out. And I'm still responding to some of them because, I'm just so grateful for you guys to be taking the time to send and to write out such thoughtful responses. I really, really appreciate it. And then last but not least, I think two recent big examples. First of all, when I was at Airbnb, I was 2 years into being a software engineer, but I kind of knew at that time that I'm ready to move to something else. And when I entered software engineering, I knew that I would make a whole career out of it. I always knew that I wanted to start my own company, and I wanted to lean more into business, strategy management side of things. So at those 2 years, I really acutely felt like this was the time for me to transition. And again, I was like earning a good salary as an engineer. It was a very clear and easy path moving forward, but I decided to again take an unconventional leap, and there was an opportunity to become a chief of staff to VP of engineering, so I decided to do that, and I didn't know what was in store for me. And last but not least, last summer I decided to leave Airbnb because I've always wanted to embark on an entrepreneurial journey, and finally now, almost a year since I've left, I'm very excited about what is to come, what I'm working on, and I'm just very happy I decided to take this leap of faith. These are just some of the examples when I used the regret minimization framework and when it made a true solid impact on my life. And I'm 100% planning to use it moving forward. And I think, and as Alex says in Founder's Journal, it is such an incredibly powerful tool that you can use both in deciding, should I move to a different city? Should I take this job? Should I take this leap of faith and start this side project or a company? Should I be in this relationship, etc.? Because this tool truly forces us to put ourselves in the shoes of our future selves and focus on long-term thinking versus short-term emotional thinking. And I think that in our lives generally, we should try to think from the perspective of how would our future self feel, and hence now my future self is very sad that I did not take more opera classes when I was back in high school, which I could have done, but the time is now past. Time is the most valuable resource that we have, and so you should optimize for not having those regrets later on in your life. And I would highly encourage you to use this very simple but powerful question. 20 years from now, would my future self regret not making this decision? Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day, and bye for now.